thing, and now it's going to be forever in my head, Claudia, that I give Claudia this title, and I'm always struggling to come up with something. And I know she gets a chuckle out of it because she sends me a little chuckle back. But this week I sent it to Mary, and then she sends me a picture. And I wish I had a PowerPoint that I could put it up here. But apparently some of you saw this, not just because she reposted it, but because you saw it out there. This was beautiful Friday morning. I think it was Friday morning. And it was this beautiful sky, and I was going to send you a message saying it's azure blue. Claudia says it's such a blue sky. And there was a plane that was carrying the banner, Love Thy Neighbor. And I thought, wow, isn't that great? And, you know, we talked this morning. I don't know what motivates people to do stuff like that, like where they take out billboards and they put these signs. But there's signs everywhere. And this time of year, there are signs. People express themselves with the signs that they put out. And so that's, at some point in our life, we have a moment where we say, God, will you just give me a sign? Or I wish you'd just show me a sign. What do you want? You know, what do you want me to do? What do you want from me? And and this is also the time of year, I had the great fortune, I hope you guys don't get tired of me saying this, but I had such a great experience in China, my short time there, because COVID cut it short, but just going through the holidays, and this time of year, they don't call them holidays there, they call them festivals, and they're just fascinated by, you know, the different stories that go with the signs, and one of them is that I like is the Little Drummer Boy. And in one of the classes that we do, I get to play this video. If you've never seen it, it's a very cute Rankin Bass Christmas special called The Little Drummer Boy. And at the end, it gives you chills, you know. But it's the Magi that come because they're following the sign. They're following this star. And the little drummer boy who lost his family, and now he's gone to see this new king, and he doesn't have anything to bring, but his little lamb gets struck down while they're gathering around the manger, and he's brokenhearted, and one of the wise men tells him to come and play and give this gift, and the lamb comes back to life, and the kid, my class, it gives me chills just to think of this, because my class, they see this for the first time, and it shows the star over the manger, you know, that classic picture, and the voice, I don't know her name, the actress that narrates it, but it's beautiful, and she says, all hate will always be wrong, but the love of God, and it's just, the star is shining, and it just gives you chills. It's great. There's signs everywhere. What do signs do? Our text is 1 Corinthians 1, 20 through 25, also previewing Q starting a new study in 1 Corinthians next week. I'm giving them a little plug here. But what are signs for? And we have so many, but basically signs, and we live in this high-tech age where we have the GPS. In fact, now the screens in our cars, even Rich has it, right? A screen in your car. These things on my screen, it kind of guesses where I want to go based on my direction. Do you have it in yours, Claudia? Right? And I'm looking over, I'll glance over it every once in a while. It's like, it's like if you want to go to these places, and it tells you how long you have to go, whether you plug it in or not. There's directions, there's signs everywhere. But what are signs? We have signs, omens, intuitions, premonitions, horoscopes, readings, and on and on and on. Not to mention dreams, and then interpretations of dreams. But understand, God spoke. He spoke the world into existence. And his Spirit, through the Word, gives understanding. But man went astray. And we have this diagram in our fellowship room there, and we know the story of the flood. But thankfully, God made promises, prophecies, and signs. And so as we draw close to, what we call the reason for the season, and we see all the sign, the demonstrations out in people's yards, and I know they all put lights and decorations out just for my entertainment. So when I'm driving by, and now it's dark at 4:30, so I can enjoy it, because I get tired really early these days. But after the promise, there's a sign. I'm going to take you through just a series, and I was going to say, Linda's not here, but I have a whole bunch of them. I was going to tell her, don't try to write these down. I actually copied them for her. But I'm going to go through this list. This word from God is a testimony, and it's complete. And I want to do this morning by way of reminder, because these will resonate with us, those of us that are here in the church, but also they've always been there. And I got a message from Jordan this morning. I didn't get to look at it, but he's going to be upset with me. But he's not here. We talked about this week, about the sign. In most of our classes right now, we're concerned with how we can be an influence, the people around us. We just sang this great song, ring out the message. How can we, as we look around here, we have a lot of seats, but there are not a lot of folks here. And yet there's a lot of folks out on the road. If you've been trying to get around the last few days, there's no shortage of people in our community. And so we want to attract them in. But one of the questions, one of the objections, we'll say, that people have is, well, what about people who never knew God? How could God judge people who never knew him? And I remember when I was down in Texas, it was this time of year, they always do this message, and this is for Jordan, he's not here, but it's going to be in here. There's always been a sign or testimony for everybody. So the world really is without excuse. And I know Gordon, he always cringed at Peter calling Lot a righteous man, because he says, why was Lot in Sodom? Why was he there if he's a righteous man? And I remember hearing the testimony, because God sends a messenger and signs everywhere so that anybody who's looking can find the answer. And so sometimes we don't know why. And I was saying this morning, I don't know what motivates someone to put the banner up there that says love thy neighbor. Somebody thought it was a good idea. And somebody would be asking, God, if you just give me a sign, and they step outside and, wow, there it is, a word from God in the heavens. It's just amazing. You never know the impact. But here's what God did. As man goes astray, God gave us his wisdom. And by the way, really, people today in the wisdom of man are coming to realize that there is no wisdom in the world without God's word. Everything has been built on, mostly perverted, but built on the word of God. And I used the example this morning. Sometimes, I come from a trade background. So if you were a hairstylist or a landscaper, and you work for that company and you start learning that craft, eventually you think, you know what? Why am I working for this idiot? I'm going to go out on my own and start my own business and work for myself. And I think that's kind of our human nature, the way we treat God. We got so wise because of God's word, then we decide we don't need God anymore. But the signs are always there when we're ready, like the prodigal son, to come back. But from the beginning, when God devastated the world in a flood. In Genesis 9, this is the flood narrative, in 9, 12, and 13, and you'll recognize this, and God said, "This is the sign of the covenant that I make between me and you and every living creature that is with you for all future generations. I have set my bow in the clouds, and it shall be a sign of the covenant between me and the earth." So God made a promise, even way back in the garden, after Adam and Eve sinned. And he makes a promise and a prophecy about what will come. And then he's going to give these signs throughout the ages. So after the promise, there's a sign. So when he makes a promise to Abraham, because after the flood, he gives Noah the similar instructions that he gave to Adam, and the result is kind of heading in the same direction. So God makes a promise to Abraham, and in that promise, he gives him a sign of the covenant. And so he says, this sign of the covenant is between me and you. And that's from Genesis 17:11. But in Exodus now, as this story starts to unfold, God's testimony, he calls Moses. As he said to Abraham he would, they were going to be captives for 400 years, and then he was going to rescue them out of there. In Exodus 3:12, he tells Moses, when Moses is up on the mountain with him, he says, "But I will be with you, and this shall be the sign for you that I have sent you. When you have brought the people of Egypt out, you shall serve God on this mountain." Imagine, we've been going through Exodus, one of our studies during the week, and I just love this. Oftentimes when we're reading through God's Word, we miss little nuggets like this. It's Exodus 3:12. God told Moses when he had called him up on the mountain the first time, he says, "Here's the sign for you. When you deliver the people out of Egypt, you're going to be back here at this mountain." What an encouragement. And there they are. And then he says, during the Exodus, in Exodus 12:13, he says, "The blood shall be a sign for you on the houses where you are. And when I see the blood, I will pass over you, and no plague will befall you to destroy you when I strike the land of Egypt." And again, I love the spring festival when I was in China, and it's a festival that really is celebrated throughout Asia. And one of the things they do is they put these, they call them couplets, but they'll put these red couplets over the doors and windows. And I asked them, "Well, why do you do that?" And basically it's because we've always done it. That's why we do it. But red is a color of luck. It's good luck. And you put it over the doors and the windows. Well, that's interesting. So when we get together as a church there and they start learning where that came from, it's wow, that's pretty neat. That's like an aha moment, all right? In the law of what we call the law of Moses, God was laying down these rules for his people that he called out and now brought out of Egypt. In Exodus 31:13, he says, "You are to speak to the people of Israel and say, 'Above all, you shall keep my Sabbaths. For this is a sign between me and you throughout your generations, that you may know that I, the Lord, sanctify you.'" And what is the Sabbath? And again, I mentioned it this morning because I've never thought about this before, but the fact that we have a 7-day week came from God. It's not something that evolved or that man learned how to calculate times and make calendars out of the stars. It came from God. God said, "I took 6 days to create this world, and then the 7th day I rested." And he says, "I'm giving this to you as a sign, but it's to sanctify you." In other words, on this Sabbath, on this day of rest, it's a time for you to meditate on my word and focus on the Lord who made you. And sanctify means to make holy. He puts it this way in Exodus 31:17. It is a sign forever between me and the people of Israel that in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, and on the seventh day he rested and was refreshed. How beautiful. And it's a sign. It doesn't come from, as Derek read this morning, it's not from the wisdom of men. This came from God. Now listen, God expects us through his testimony, and because he gave us his righteous will and had it recorded, he expects us to have some level of discernment and use, like parents used to tell us, use the good sense that God gave you and kind of reason stuff out. So listen to this. In Deuteronomy 13:1-5. Now here's something, previously they were told how to recognize a prophet, but watch how he explains it this time. This is Deuteronomy 13:1-5. If a prophet or a dreamer arises among you and gives you a sign or a wonder, and the sign or wonder that he tells you comes to pass, and if he says, let us go after other gods, which you have not known, and let us serve them, you shall not listen to the words of that prophet or the dreamer of dreams, for the Lord your God is testing you to know whether you love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul. You shall walk after the Lord your God and fear him and keep his commandments and obey his voice, and you shall serve him and hold fast him. But that prophet or that dreamer of dreams shall be put to death, because he has taught rebellion against the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt and redeemed you out of the house of slavery, to make you leave the way in which the Lord your God commanded you to walk, so you shall purge the evil from your midst. Isn't that amazing? God expects us. And when I was reading that, I was thinking of Jesus when he was tempted. And Satan is saying, well, you could throw yourself off of this pinnacle. God says he'll rescue you. His angels won't let any harm come to you. But Jesus knew the word better than Satan. And he knew Satan was twisting that word. You should not put the Lord your God to the test. But here we see God expects us. Are there people today that claim to have visions or dreams and want to say, I have a word from God? It's all over the place. And shame on us, living in such a high-tech world, that we can digitally pull this word up ourselves and do what Paul says. Check the scriptures to see if what he was saying was true. Because how many times in scripture are we warning, many false prophets will come? And yet, people fall. We have that saying, right? If you don't stand for something, you'll fall for anything. God expects us to use this. But even in the prophets, God sends these prophets, and oh my goodness. So Ezekiel, he said, he made Ezekiel mute for a time. And it's interesting that he says, this is Ezekiel 24:24. Well, in 24:24, he says he made him mute so that Ezekiel will know that I'm the Lord. And then in verse 27, he said, so that they will know that I'm the Lord. And it reminded me of the Exodus in the beginning, when God first started these signs. He told Moses, he said, the first thing I want, Moses, you need to know that I'm God. Then Israel needs to know that I'm God. And then you're going to make it known that Pharaoh knows that I'm God, and all Egypt, and ultimately all the world knows that I am God, because I'm doing these wonderful signs. So we need to understand who God is. And then people around us can understand. In Isaiah 20 verse 3, he had to walk naked and barefoot for 3 years as a sign against Egypt and Cush. So here sounds kind of strange, right? as I've spent so much of these last several years of my life studying God's Word, I think, what has God not done? Any question that I might have, or something I might say, God, if you would only do this, then I would get it. And he's pretty much answered all of them. Sometimes I think, oh wow, I remember asking that question. But listen to this. This was for Jordan. Isaiah 66, verse 19. Because, again, that objection, well, what about the people that never knew God? And as I learn more about the Word of God, I sometimes get less patient with people that ask silly questions. But these were my questions, so I try to keep that in perspective. But was there anybody in the world that did not know God at the time of Adam? He's the only one. He knows God. At the time of the flood, was there anyone in the world when they got off the ark that did not know God? I mean, how do we get to this point in the world where we have people that never knew or never heard of God? It was choices. It was decisions that people made. Was there anybody in the world that did not know Sodom and Gomorrah? This was a sign. And I'll tell you, it was not wisdom of the ages that taught civilizations how to be couples, men and women together. It was warnings from God that men and rulers adhered to for a long time. And then they get away from it. Why? Because, they weren't judged so quickly. And I think, why do we repeat some of the mistakes of history? Because we don't learn from God. And, I mentioned this. Jesus said, during the destruction of Jerusalem, that if he didn't cut that time short, no human being would have survived. If God told the Israelites during the Exodus, he said, if I stay with you, none of you are going to survive. As time goes by, because they kept grumbling. Thankfully, God knows us really well. And he's very patient and merciful with us. Isaiah 66:19 says this, "And I will set a sign among them, and from them I will send survivors to the nations, to Tarshish, Pul, and Lud, who draw the bow, to Tubal and Javan, to the coastlands far away, that they have not heard my fame or seen my glory, and they shall declare my glory among the nations." So I think, the prophets went out. They weren't just for Israel. I mean, think of Jonah, and it was the sign that Jesus said. But now we get to Isaiah. For our time, Isaiah 7:14. "Therefore the Lord himself will give you a sign. Behold, the virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and shall call his name Emmanuel." Luke records this. So when Jesus was born, at the time of his birth, in Luke 2:12, he says, "And this will be a sign for you. You will find a baby wrapped in swaddling clothes and lying in a manger." That's what the shepherds were told as the angels gathered and proclaimed to them that the Savior was born. But Jesus uses that sign of Jonah in Matthew 12:39. They ask, well, give us a sign. What sign are you going to give us? And he says, "An evil and adulterous generation seeks for a sign, but no sign will be given to you except the sign of the prophet Jonah." And isn't it ironic that Jonah was the prophet that went to Nineveh? He wasn't a prophet sent to Israel. Sometimes things just hit me. Little ironies. In Acts, so as the gospel, the good news, the Christ with us, the Emmanuel, starts to take up residence in the world, and then Jesus witnesses, the apostles, as they were going out in Acts chapter 4, in 4:16, they say, Peter and John, they heal this lame man, and they say, what shall we do with these men? For that a notable sign has been performed through them is evident to all the inhabitants of Jerusalem, and we can't deny it. And verse 22 of Acts 4, he says, for the man on whom this sign of healing was performed was more than 40 years old. Paul, we're going to get to our scripture now, but in 1 Corinthians 14:22, Paul says, thus tongues were a sign not for believers but for unbelievers, while prophecy is a sign not for unbelievers but for believers. So now we get to our text. So what is a sign? A sign is for direction, points the way. And so I've been considering this lately. Paul, and I'm going to go back to verse 18. This is 1 Corinthians chapter 1. Derek read starting in 20 through 25. But verse 18, for the word of the cross is folly to those who are perishing, but to us who are being saved, it is the power of God. And from Paul's perspective, understand Paul's commission. He experienced the power of God. He took the commission that God gave him to be a preacher to the Gentiles, and he took it seriously as we were finishing up his letter to the Galatians, which is a very strong, bold letter. But Paul speaks in terms of this power, because from Paul's perspective, Paul was commissioned by the power of God. Remember, he's knocked off his horse and he was blinded, and then he got his sight back, but he does a 180. He goes from persecuting the church to proclaiming the church. But he's all about power. And as Q mentioned this morning, he wasn't just a Jew of Jews who studied under the greats of the rabbis, but he was also a Roman citizen, and he was very well trained in Roman philosophy as well, in the philosophy of the day, so he could be a great communicator. But he says in our text, starting in 1 Corinthians 1:20, where is the one who is wise? Where is the scribe? And the scribes were the ones that wrote stuff down, and they were expected to understand this. If you're writing and rewriting the word over and over again, it should start having an effect on you, you would think. And people trusted the scribes for their ability to explain things to them. He says, where is the debater of this age? Has not God made foolish the wisdom of the world? For since in the wisdom of God, the world did not know God through wisdom. And again, I said at the beginning, understand all human wisdom was built on the understanding of the Word of God. And then ultimately, I know enough now, I'm going to go out on my own, like the tradesman who decides, I've got trained enough. I'm going to go out now and start my own business, and I'm not listening to you anymore. And if anybody's interested, I have a good book that talks about that. It's called The E-Myth, and it stands for the entrepreneurial seizure. When we think we're smarter than God. But he says, verse 22, Jews demand signs, and Greeks seek wisdom, but we preach Christ crucified, a stumbling block to Jews and folly to the Gentiles. But to those who are called, both Jews and Greeks, Christ, the power of God and the wisdom of God. For the foolishness of God is wiser than men, and the weakness of God is stronger than men. So we see, and Paul goes on to talk about this wisdom, and he calls it a secret wisdom. It's not secret anymore because it's been revealed, and Paul makes it known. But he certainly does have wisdom. But he says in 1 Corinthians 4:20, the kingdom of God does not consist in talk, but in power. And so the signs were there to point the way. The testimony is here to show us the power of God. And Paul says in Romans 1:16 and 17, it's this famous verse where he says, I'm not ashamed of the gospel, because in it is the power of God unto salvation. He says, to everyone who believes, the Jew first and also the Greek, for in it, it's the righteousness of God that's revealed from faith for faith, as it is written, the righteous shall live by faith. So to Paul, it was power. And of course, he lives in what we call the apostolic age. There's a lot of power being demonstrated. There's evil, there's demons, there's spirits, and there's healing going on. And people would ask, well, what does this mean? There's these signs being done. What does it mean? And they're there to say, here's what it means. So, people are always looking for, answers from the other side. I don't follow the current shows, but they're rehashes of older ones. So there used to be Edwards. I forgot his name now. But years ago, I think it was back in the 90s, this was the guy that used to talk to the dead. And so he had the show that, people would say, oh, can you talk to my relative or whatever? And everybody's like, I want answers. They have shows now. There's all these near-death experiences, and then people want to say, well, I was on the other side, and then I came back. And I always love A Christmas Carol this time of year. Christmas Carol. And what is it? It's basically, in my mind, it's a story of Lazarus and the rich man. And you remember the story Jesus tells, and the rich man, he's crying out in torment now, and he's saying, well, can't you send someone to my brothers to warn them? Because I'm in torment now, and I don't want other people to befall me. And you think of Jacob Marley. He was the one that was Ebenezer's partner, and he dies, and now he comes back, and he's going to try and set Ebenezer's path aright. And so, but that's the story, right? Could I send, and what was his response? Hey, they have the law and the prophets. They have the testimony. Do you think that they're going to be impressed if someone comes back from the dead? Isn't that, and again, it's ironic, because Jesus' whole life in ministry was about telling us where he came from. He came from eternity. He came from the glory of God. And not only that, he says, I'm going to give you the sign of Jonah, and he's in the grave for 3 days, and then he resurrects. Did he have any new revelation? Well, Jesus, what was it like when you died now, and then you came back? You notice they don't ask him that question, because his message didn't change. He said, you do whatever you need to do to stay out of hell, where there's weeping and gnashing of teeth. I have gone ahead, he told his apostles, and I prepare a place for you. And God keeps his promises, and that's the message today. We have this word, this testimony now. It's pointing the way, but it reveals the power of God. If anybody says, well, God, if you would just do this, give me a sign. They're all here. And now they're contained for us, but it also reveals the purpose of God. So we have his direction, a demonstration of his power, and it reveals in it the purpose. And Titus 2:11 kind of sums this up. Paul's letter to Titus 2:11 through 14, he says, for the grace of God has appeared, bringing salvation for all people, training us to renounce ungodliness and worldly passions and to live self-controlled, upright, and godly lives in this present age, waiting for our blessed hope, the appearing of the glory of our great God and Savior, Jesus Christ. Now listen, who gave himself for us to redeem us from all lawlessness and to purify for himself a people for his own possession who are zealous for good works. Isn't that great? It doesn't matter where you start. The Ethiopian eunuch was reading from Isaiah. And Philip comes along and he takes him from there. And what does he preach to him? Jesus. So no matter where you start, this whole testimony is about Jesus. Let me just give you these couple of verses. In Revelation, as John is receiving this revelation, in 1910, he gets to this point and he's overwhelmed and he falls down to worship him. But he says, "You must not do that. I'm a fellow servant with you and your brothers who hold the testimony of Jesus. Worship God, for the testimony of Jesus is the spirit of prophecy." And here's a couple verses from Matthew's gospel. Remember Jesus, when he gave the Sermon on the Mount, is Matthew 5 through 7. But in Matthew 5, 17 and 18, he says, Jesus, after he gives them the Beatitudes, he says, you need to be like this. He says, Matthew 5, 17, "Do not think that I have come to abolish the law or the prophets. I have not come to abolish, but to fulfill them. For truly," and I say truly, 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 when you hear that, listen up, this is important. "Truly I say to you, until heaven and earth pass away, not an iota, not a dot will pass from the law until all is accomplished." I'm saying this because words mean something, and God gives us the words he wants us to understand, the way he wants us to understand them. People and preachers and the voices you hear in science will say, here's what God says, I'm going to tell you what it means. And I'm saying, be wise and look at the scripture, and does that make sense? Does that fit what the scripture actually says? By the way, there's no more secrets. If you want to know this testimony from God, you can read it. If somebody says, I've got this message and nobody else knows it, oh my goodness. It takes time. I understand that, Mary. Right? I understand that it takes time. But if we stick with it, Marion, do we get joy? Do we get understanding? Sometimes these things don't fit together, but watch this. Jesus says when his apostles ask him in Matthew 24, they give him all these questions. He's just pronounced all these woes, and they want answers. When is this going to happen? What's the sign? How are we going to recognize this? And he says, truly, Matthew 24, 34 and 35, "Truly I say to you, this generation will not pass away until all these things take place." How many of these things? How many of the prophecies? All. Everything is fulfilled in Christ. He says, truly, truly, this generation will not pass away until all these things take place. Listen to these words. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will not pass away. Well, that has to mean something. Jesus just said heaven and earth will pass away. What does that mean? Forgive me, I get frustrated with this because I'm dealing with this in a study in Revelation right now. Let me read this to you, okay? I want this to be a comfort. I don't mean this to be, to upset you if maybe you're hearing this for the first time. And look, this may be fine. Revelation 21, it's the new heavens and the new earth. Well, what is that? Jesus just said what it is, if we're paying attention. Listen, it's the same exact words. Revelation 21, "Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth. For the first heaven and the first earth had passed away." And I know people want to interpret this and say, that's heaven. He's talking about heaven. He's talking about when Jesus comes and sums it all up. That's not what Jesus said. He said heaven and earth will pass away in his apostles' generation. So that has to mean something here when Jesus says there's a new heaven and a new earth, because the old passed away. So he must be talking about something other than the final. "I saw the holy city, New Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride adorned for her husband. And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, behold, the dwelling place of God is with man. Amen, brothers and sisters. This is the temple of God, is with man. He will dwell with them, and they will be his people, and God himself will be with them as their God. He will wipe away every tear from their eyes, and death shall be no more. Neither shall there be mourning, nor crying, nor pain, for the former things have passed away. And I know people want to ascribe that to what it's going to be like in heaven. This is eternal life. This is the gospel message that God entrusted to us. That's the message that's going to save the world, which is what he made us for. That's our purpose. And he was seated on the throne and said, behold, I am making all things new. Also he said, write this down, for these words are trustworthy and true. And he said to me, this is Revelation 21:6. It is done. I am the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. To the thirsty, I will give from the spring of the water of life without payment. To the one who conquers will have this heritage, and I will be his God, and he will be my son. Isn't that beautiful? The genesis of all truth is the Word. The word literally translated is what the Bible means. It's the Word. Jesus is the Alpha and the Omega. He's the beginning and end. Life is full of signs for the seeker to come to this living Word. In it is revealed the power and the purpose of God. And the invitation stands as we gather around this memorial feast now. It's the table of the Lord. So in this season of signs, I hope that the sign resonates in your heart, and you renew a right spirit in you. And be thankful. God, any question that you would have asked of God, He's made known in his word if we just stick with him and stay. So many people quit. It gets difficult, I know. But where would you rather be on a Sunday morning when it's cold outside, when we can come here and gather where it's cold inside and be warmed by the Word of God? In 1 Corinthians, as Q begins that study next week, we're excited here about what God has done. I love the invitation songs. Our sister Pam was just visiting. I was hoping she was going to be with us this morning, but she's got so many people to see and family. It's hard when you're traveling. But as we stand and we sing this invitation song, hear those words. Let them resonate with you. Think of the people in your world at this time. This is the season where we have the ability to reach out to others. Let's consider that as we stand and sing invitation.
I believe in the